Good morning, afternoon, evening, or good night. This is Mr. Messina, and I'm about to talk to you about cell membranes. This is typically for any freshman biology class. Specifically, I'm talking to the St. Charles High School freshman biology class that I'm teaching. So, we've talked about in previous videos, the most recent video about solutions and how solutions affect living cells. This video is going to be talking about cell membranes themselves and how they're structured. You can see right here in this image that we have, this is actually what an actual cell membrane looks like if you actually take a look at it on a subcellular basis. Now, the cell membrane has a few components. Firstly, the cell membrane separates living cells from non-living cells. They are the barrier that actually delineates between something that's alive and something that isn't. So it controls traffic inside and outside of a cell. Now, this is very important, especially since it's actually doing the controlling of the traffic that goes in and out. This is not the same thing as a cell wall. A cell wall doesn't let anything through, like I said before, unless it's actually broken. Now, because it allows things in and out, it's called selectively permeable. This specifically means that some substances can cross a lot easier than other substances. Some of the things that cross really easily are like water or sometimes chloride ions, things like that. Now there are other things that actually do not cross as easily, but we'll get to those as we go. Now the membrane itself is made of things called phospholipids, as well as proteins and other macromolecules. We'll talk about phospholipids, what they are and what a protein is, but these macromolecules, all they really are, all that really means are large molecules. And I mean large in comparison to like phospholipids and cellular materials, not large the way we think of large. Now these are the phospholipids that I was talking about. Phospholipids, they have this phosphate head, which means it has the element phosphorus attached to a few other things, and you can have hydrogens attached to a phosphorus, you can have carbons, those kind of things like that. But what we're really concerned with right now is we're concerned with that phosphate head. The reason we're so concerned with it is because those things are hydrophilic. Hydro meaning water, philic meaning good or happy with. This means that that phosphate group, that phosphate head, is interacting with the outside world or the inside world. So it's interacting with water. So water is up here, right there. Let me just draw something over here. Now, this right here is the fatty acid tail. This section right here. This little cartoon that we're looking at right here is nice to depict, but this is actually really how they look, these chains of atoms. But this fatty acid tail right down here, that's hydrophobic. Hydro meaning water, of course, and then phobic meaning afraid. So where the top part, the phosphate head, actually interacts with water, this bottom part only interacts with other fatty acid tails. So it's arranged like a bilayer. And how that looks is you can see all of the phosphate heads here, and this is water. This is the outside of the membrane. And this is the inside. This actually has a bunch of water too. So you can see that the phosphate heads are here, and they interact with the water, but the chains are all in this region right here. They interact only with other chains. These hydrophobic molecules, they will only interact with hydrophobic molecules. The hydrophilic ones, which are of course these, the heads, will only interact with with water or other hydrophilic things. So this is another picture of the bilayer. Like I said before in the previous slide, that little kind of stickball cartoon that we had, that's not really how they look. This is actually much closer to how these things are actually looking. What you're looking at, each one of those individual balls is actually a different atom. The black ones are carbon, so it's the black ones are carbon. The blue ones themselves are hydrogen. Blue ones, those are hydrogen. And then the red ones are oxygen. Now before you go, hey, wait a minute, Mr. Messina, What about the yellow ones, like right there and right there? The yellow ones are actually the phosphate group, or the phosphorus groups. Those are the phosphorus ones. So you can see over here, let me clean this up just a smidgen. Get rid of that. You can see the polar hydrophilic heads, which are up here, and you can clearly see those right here interacting with water. Water would be up in this region right here. You can see the water being up on top and on bottom, and the hydrophobic ends, which are the fatty acid tails here. So you can see those right through there. So the phospholipid bilayer, as it looks in like a 3D, it's a sphere, guys. It's actually very much round. So you see there's water on the inside right here, water on the outside that right here, and this is the bilayer, this kind of sandwich membrane that wraps the entire cell around. You can see in this cartoon we're taking a more micro view of the actual bilayer itself. You can see the familiar phosphate groups here. You can see the tails. That's what are these little black things. But you'll notice there's a bunch of other stuff going on in the membrane. Specifically, you can also see cholesterol, which I know a lot of you guys might have heard before that cholesterol is bad for you, or certain types of cholesterol is bad for you, or too much of it. You got to keep in mind, guys, that too much of anything is a bad thing. Too much baseball, too many blueberries, too many apples, too much time sleeping, all of these things can be very bad and detrimental to your health. But the cholesterol plays an important role for the membrane itself. You see, this whole membrane, this whole shebang right here, it needs to be viscous. It can't be too fluid like water, otherwise it will literally just flow away. But it can't be too rigid like an eggshell or like a table. Otherwise, it's not going to be able to bend and contort and allow us to move as well as we want to be able to move. So there's kind of a fine line. You kind of want your membrane to be sort of like a syrup. Cholesterol toughens it up and adds viscosity to it. Viscosity meaning makes it harder for it to flow from place to place. So if you have enough cholesterol, it'll be that nice syrupy setup that we want. Now you'll notice there's some purple things here, and these things right here, this thing over here, these are all membrane proteins, and these serve a number of different purposes. Some of them serve the purpose of taking in signals from the outside of the cell and then changing things around inside the cell to respond to that signal. Some of these, like this one right over here, this one's probably some kind of ion channel that lets water or specific different types of ions and things through. There are other proteins that actually allow larger molecules to come through, like glucose, but that's a bit different kind of a transport, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later in a later video. So, as I was saying before, there are many functions to membrane proteins. You have some that are transporters, and these are the ion channels that I talked about, where they let little ions, they let them go through and cross the bilayer. You have enzyme activity, proteins, and all these guys, they do is they hang out attached to the bilayer, and what they do is they facilitate just different reactions, different catalytic reactions. You have cell surface receptors where, like I said before, an outside cell signal might show up, bind to this protein right here, and then this thing is going to do something, whether it starts producing a lot of the molecule inside the cell, or maybe it needs to do something else entirely. But either way, it is a result of this external marker hitting this surface receptor. There are cell surface identity markers, which just identify the cell itself. So if you've ever wondered if two cells met, since they can't talk to each other, they can't see or hear, this is how they identify what kind of cell it is. You have cell adhesion proteins, and their only job is to hold cells together and make sure they don't float away or drift away. And then you have attachment points to the cytoskeleton. Remember how we talked about the cytoskeleton and how it keeps the cell shaped correctly? Well, the cytoskeleton anchors itself in the cell membrane, just so the membrane doesn't collapse in onto the cell. These proteins actually hold the cytoskeleton pieces together. That's it for Mr. Messina today. Tune in next time so we talk about membrane transport. Have a wonderful day, evening, afternoon, or whenever you're watching this video.